Despite this being one of the first Chris Rea studio albums released, it was one of the last ones that I bought, and I was guilty with this of doing something that I've done with other albums as well. Being a collector, I listened to it once and then put it down and didn't listen to it again. Well, this week I have given it the proper treatment. I've listened to it 4 or 5 times properly, in depth through, and I now have a fully formed opinion of these songs. And indeed, where Chris Rea's self-titled album from 1981, 1982, we'll come on to that in a minute, which one it actually is, where it sits in the development of his catalogue so far. So welcome back if you have watched any of the videos before to our Chris Rea series. We looked at Deltics in the last video, which was the second studio album by Chris Rea. I've also looked at Tennis, the third studio album in the past, so we are working chronologically through now to this CD here, Chris Rea, a self-titled album from either 1981 or 1982. The reason is that it's not really clear when this was released. If you look at Discogs, Music Brains, the Chris Rea Facebook page, it indicates this was released in February 1981. Wikipedia says 1982. The UK official charts has this first charting in April 1982, so whether that's a reissue or what, I don't know. But one thing's for certain, because the next album, Water Sign, was released in 1983, so this was either 1981 or 1982. I don't have the vinyl for this, I only have the CD. For Deltics and Tennis, I have both the vinyl and the CD, so forgive me for today, you're just going to have to look at the CD. And you're going to have to forgive me a number of other things as well, because I am struck particularly at this point in Chris Rea's career. Chris Rea's career. There's a rhyme there somewhere. There's actually very little about his albums that can be found online, particularly this one, the self-titled one. And the best source of knowledge I found was this great set that I've got, that I've talked about in previous videos. Era 1, 1978 to 84. So this includes the A-sides, the B-sides, and rarities. And this is particularly valuable from a singles perspective, the B-sides, and the story of One Fine Day. Well, what's One Fine Day, may you ask? Well, One Fine Day could well have been this. This might never have existed. One Fine Day might well have been Chris Rea's 4th studio album. Well, let's talk about One Fine Day as I shut the window. One Fine Day was a shelved album which was recorded around about 1980, 1981, certainly between Chris's 3rd album, Tennis, and this album, Chris Rea. And for reasons unknown, I would guess that Chris Rea was unhappy with the material, or at least how it sounded. It was never released until 2019. It was released as a very limited copy. I think it was around about 1,000 copies. And then later on, it was included at the start of CD 2 on this great Era 1 set. So the 9 songs on that set, 3 of them were re-recorded for this album. So Loving You, Do You Still Dream, and One Sweet and Tender Touch appear here. There's another song that was on it, Let Me Be the One, was the B-side to Loving You, which was the first song off the Chris Rea album. One Fine Day, the title track from that album, if you will, that was first issued on a 4-song CD single in 1993, Soft Top, Hard Shoulder. But the first official release in 2019, we hadn't heard those before, were If I Ever Break Free, Sierra Sierra, Members Only, and One Night With You. So the interesting thing comes immediately here, which is something I'll talk about in my review of the individual songs. Some of these songs reappear. 3 of them reappear. And because Chris Rea wasn't very happy, or possibly wasn't very happy with how these songs sounded, you've also got to bear in mind as well that the first couple of albums for Chris Rea, apart from that hit, Fool If You Think It's Over, didn't do all that well. So, as a bit of a precursor to what I'm going to talk about, there is somewhat of a refinement to that sound. Now, I could turn this video into a comparison between One Fine Day and the Chris Rea album. I'm just going to call it the self-titled one because I'll get confused else. But I'm not going to make this video that. I'm not going to look at comparisons between that album and this, mainly because I haven't listened to that album, but because I want this video to be all about the self-titled album. But that little bit of context in there I thought was really important to talk about One Fine Day. Another thing that's really important context before we talk about this. So the last 2 albums, Tennis and Deltics, have featured a regular rhythm section. So Ian Naisbitt, Norman Naisbitt, we've gone all northern, like Chris. Mick Hutchinson and Graham Watson in the main were playing on Deltics and tennis. They were the recognised rhythm section. There were recognised musicians that did play on individual tracks, but those are the musicians, those three musicians are the main ones that are credited in the main credits. Now, interestingly, in the booklet of this CD, which once again, like the first two, despite not being a magnet pressing, this is from East West Records, this features a very similar booklet as to the vinyl, so it's a very good repackaging of that vinyl booklet. However, for some reason on that vinyl or the CD, there isn't a clear main credits section. Like these albums, there are credits for individual songs, so I had to go through quite carefully and look at who's played on the majority of this record. And not to go on for too long, but the main players are not Norman Naisbitt, put the nickname and the real name together there, Ian Naisbitt. They're not Mick Hutchinson. They're not Graham Watson. Naisbitt, Hutchinson and Watson are all out for this record. There is a new band in town for this album. On drums, you've got Dave Mattox or Stuart Elliott. The reason I say or is that both play on several tracks, so I consider those to be the main players. And then on bass, we have Dave Patton, which plays mainly on most of these tracks. And then we have other musicians playing on different tracks. We've got saxophones, etc., etc. But in general, for that rhythm section, we've got a couple of external guitar players as well on some tracks. Chris Rea plays a lot of guitars, like on the previous albums as well. The other thing as well here is that on Deltics, on production, we had Gus Dudgeon. This was his last album he produced for Chris Rea, well known for working with Elton John. On Tennis, Chris Rea self-produced this, but for the self-titled album, it's a collaboration between Chris Rea and John Kelly. John Kelly comes in, and the crucial thing here is that John Kelly doesn't work with Chris Rea then until The Road to Hell. There is another producer whose name I have forgotten who works with Chris Rea after this album, then comes in for a fair few albums after this. That name has escaped me. But John Kelly comes back in again for The Road to Hell and O Burge. Possibly Chris Rea's two best albums. So, is this Chris Rea's third best album? Let's find out. We have 11 tracks here. On side A of the original vinyl, you would have had Loving You, If You Choose to Go, Guitar Street, Do You Still Dream, and Every Beat of My Heart. And then on side 2, we have Goodbye Little Columbus, One Sweet Tender Touch, Do It For Your Love, Just Wanna Be With You, Run Away, and When You Know Your Love Has Died. Now, to piggyback to when I was on about my first listen before, the songs that I very much picked up were Loving You. That was one of the main reasons why I wanted to buy this album, because I think Loving You's a great track. I'd heard that on various Chris Rea compilations. I don't think any of these other tracks really appear, though, on those compilations. Guitar Street was one I liked, and Every Beat of My Heart. None of the other tracks I could particularly remember, just sitting here and looking at the back of the cover. But here we go. So, the first song, Loving You. Now, I love the guitar sound in this. There's an infectious sound. I love a sing-song to this one. It's one of those that it's quite nice because it's not a new song for me, so I know all the lyrics already. Great fun. Really like Loving You. Something we'll touch on later, and I've hinted at already, is this kind of safe approach, this refined approach. And this one does share that similar approach. However, this one has things in the song to look forward to. I find as a listener, I really enjoy it when I have little things to look forward to, whether it's a little riff or a little solo that goes on. There's a great guitar solo in this, and in general, there's a really nice soulful sound to this one. Again, as I said earlier, this one is fun. We then have If You Choose to Go, which is a more laid-back sound. It's a chilled vibe, certainly one that I can probably get immersed in. And you know what? I just like the riff and the overall rhythm that's going on here. That laid-back vibe, yes, on one hand you could say it is a little bit undercooked, certainly musically, but on the other hand, you know, for what I'm looking for from this song, it's actually fine. And I think lyrically it's quite intriguing because it's not revealing too much in its lyrics. There's a little bit of an unsaid word there. You've got to kind of read between the lines, I think. And I can actually hear a little bit of this album in If You Choose to Go. So there is a little bit of momentum carrying on from that previous album. Now, Guitar Street, that was the second one I said that I knew. And obviously, I know it because it's just a good blooming track. I mean, it's a great... I put good on my notes, but I'm going to say great. Mid-tempo rocker, there's some noodling in the middle. I think that Chris Rea's gravelly vocal delivery really suits this one. This one just rocks. If there's one song, if you're not a massive Chris Rea fan, but you like just good old-fashioned rock and roll, Guitar Street is one for you. Do You Still Dream is a little bit like If You Choose to Go, that it's a bit undercooked, underdeveloped lyrically. But this time, actually, it's shorter than If You Choose to Go, but I find because it doesn't offer that much, it's got quite an extended instrumental section. I think this could definitely be shorter. And it's quite repetitive. So if you make it shorter in itself, you cut out some of that repetitiveness. I'm repeating the word repetitiveness 3 times because I can't pronounce repetitiveness. That's like a real tongue twister, but I got there in the end. Those were my reflections more when I listened to it earlier. On later listens, I did grow into that midsection a little bit more. There's a nice guitar solo at the end of the track. So you know what? This one is passable, albeit probably the weakest one we've had so far. And then Every Beat to My Heart, which closes out side 1. This is just one that really tugs at the heartstrings. It's lovely. The lyrics are very emotive, but not kind of, wishy-washy, soppy stuff that you might have got from artists in the 70s, possibly. And Chris was great at this, wasn't he? In his other albums, in other songs, obvious picks being the likes of Josephine really later on. So at the end of side 1, I'm going to give you a summary of side 1 in a minute, but I'm going to show you something that might get this video removed from YouTube. Are you ready? And it's despicable, really. At the end of side 1, we've got a rude picture. And what's all that about? Shocking. So side 1, the first half of the album, I think there's some promise here. Apart from Do You Still Dream being a little bit undercooked, and that probably be the weakest of the 5, you know what? They're all solid, and they offer slightly different qualities, so a good start to the album as far as I'm concerned. Does side 2 continue that? Goodbye Little Columbus. First listen, synth, keys, a saxophone. I mean, that was interesting. My eyebrow was raised already. And I find this one's a bit of a development towards that mid-80s sound. We're not quite there yet, but this is actually the closest I've heard it sound towards more of that sort of Shamrock Diary sound that I've heard on this album so far. Speaking of the 80s, unfortunately, there is a drum machine here which really dates this song. And actually, for me, that really good sax solo near the start of the track has that drum machine within it. I'd actually prefer that sax solo to be isolated rather than having that drum sound in it as well. But you know what? Solid start to side 2. One Sweet Tender Touch, which I thought in 1982, I'm going to call it 1982, as being the year when this album was released. This one is a little bit of a surprise because I think it harks back to more of a 70s sound. I mean, not that I'm complaining. I mean, this might be another video entirely, but the 70s is probably my favourite music decade. The 80s, because of the drum machines, etc. that came in, turned me off a little bit. So I'm not complaining about this sounding anything like it was from the 70s. You got the sax back again, you got strings, and actually I was quite enthusiastic on first listen, but as I listened and listened on, that enthusiasm did wane quite a bit. Now, we've looked so far, we've had Every Beat of My Heart, which is a really nice slow ballad kind of track. If You Choose to Go, Do You Still Dream is a little bit, laid back. I wouldn't call it a ballad, but a little bit slow. One Sweet Tender Touch is probably the slowest, more plodding song of them all so far. And I think when that starts to get repetitive, as it does throughout side 2, then that does become a bit of a problem for me. And I did notice on a couple of my listens that it was at this point that I noticed myself starting to lose a little bit of interest in this album, even if the chorus is a bit of an earworm. Now, the one caveat that I would put to this is that it has been very warm this week. We've had a real heat wave. Fortunately today, it is a little bit cooler. So, is the caveat the fact that after 6 songs, I'm a little bit burnt out? I don't know, maybe. And interestingly, comparing this to some of the other songs that I really love by Chris Rea and outside of Chris Rea, this should work for me because it's a ballad, which I love those, but I just don't really get any feeling from the lyric. There's a nice sax solo in the middle of this, but it's feeling that's the real problem for me. Feeling and energy as well. Do It For Your Love is the next song, which I'm convinced is a definite On The Beach prototype, particularly with its introduction, the guitar, the drum sound. Let me know whether you think that's a prototype as well. But overall, after that promising start, the lyric, the hook, it's all just a little bit flat, and the female backing vocal in the chorus just gives me a bit of a disco vibe. really interesting that this early 80s period, I think maybe artists weren't quite sure what to do because the music, what's the word? Not the background, but I guess the music scene was moving so quickly that kind of a disco vibe was really out of kilter by now. And I haven't really got a problem with the disco vibe overall, but it just doesn't suit this song, doesn't suit this album. And the whole idea, the whole premise of do it for your love, I think this is a little bit bland and it's not really there. Just Want to Be With You. Now, I picked up a bit of Springsteen here, which is a really good comparison, but despite that comparison, I struggled to get excited about this one. What I will say, and I have no idea why, but I thought it every time I listened to it, I didn't think of it beforehand, but subconsciously in the back of my mind, the opening to this just gives me the vibe of this song being played at a gig, and the crowd just starts going wild. Don't know why. Can't answer it. But after that opening, again, it sounds a bit flat. And this, I think, is the first time that I've mentioned this. I wonder whether it's production that lets this album down. Really daft comparison. But when you look at Kiss, their first 3 albums sound really poor in terms of their production, and the songs sound a lot better on the Alive album. The live album from 1975 after the first 3 albums. Is this the same story that these songs could possibly sound better with a bit of a polish to the production, but crucially not a fine-tuning polish? More on that in a bit. Runaway, the penultimate track. The introduction to this is good, but again, turns a little bit flat. Production, again, I wonder whether production's to blame here. Something I did pick up on this one is that the guitar sound near the end of this does remind me of another Chris Rea song. And I think after racking my brains more and more, I thought it's something from Auberge, it's something on the second half of Auberge. I think it's Winter Song, which doesn't appear on my LP, but did appear on the CD version, just in a slightly different tempo. I've listened to both of those, and yeah, they do sound similar. I'm wondering whether you can hear that too, or whether it's just me that hears that. We then finish the album with When You Know Your Love Has Died, which is a power ballad to finish things off, which normally, once again, yee! The previous album, Tennis, finished in that sort of vibe with Stick It. Does Tennis? No, Deltics, that doesn't. It finishes with Seabird, which is a lovely slow song. But similar to Stick It, really, in terms of the vibe that's here. But again, there's just not enough power to this one. A power ballad with not enough power. It's somewhat powerful, but if you look later on at something like Love Turns to Lies from Shamrock Diaries, I could have said Hired Gun, but the themes of that one are a little bit different. That song is a lot more powerful to me. Again, is it just because the production is a little bit undercooked? I don't know. I can't really answer it because I don't think we've had a remaster of this album. This song has a spark. Yep, I accept that. But even after 4 or 5 listens, it's not grabbing me. I feel like maybe I could have said for the first couple of listens, I'm not sure. But after that, I'm really enjoying this now. It's just not there. Even though, at the end, it does have a kind of David Gilmour-esque guitar solo. So as for side 2, I think you could tell that the vibe of my commentary changed significantly. Because I think this side definitely lets the momentum of the album down for me. It starts well, Goodbye Little Columbus. But then the rest of it doesn't do that much for me. And I think there's a definite element of safety involved here. Is the idea of this trying to produce a hit album? Record company pressure. Now, these claims that I'm making here are totally unevidenced. But I'm just wondering, because particularly the songs on side 2, they really lack energy, especially compared to Tennis. If you listen to stuff like Forever and Ever and Good News off here, even Stick It as well. And then the more primitive sound of Deltics. It feels like maybe because those two didn't do all that well, Chris Rea is trying to make up for it, and that is something that definitely appears on side 2. We're going to look at a couple of bonus tracks before we bring this to the end, and that is thanks to this wonderful, which I'll keep mentioning, Era 1 78 to 84 CD. And we're going to look at the 2 non-album B-sides here. So we have Let Me Be the One, which was the B-side to Loving You, and Don't Look Back, which is the B-side to Every Beat of My Heart. And I was thinking, right, this is really interesting because I'm not too sure when these are recorded. So are these going to harken more back to Tennis, or are they going to be more like One Fine Day? Because there's a lot of things going on here. I think John Kelly produces both tracks as well. That's crucial. Not that I'm laying any blame at John Kelly here, but just in terms of the context of what's going on, It all adds a little bit, few crumbs, if you like, to what's going on here. And what I will say immediately before looking at these bonus tracks, and something that I've had to think of myself, is that these are definitely likely to sound better because of the remastering from 2022. I noticed that in the last video I did. I looked at Cleveland Calling, which was the B-side to Diamonds off of Deltics. That sounded a whole lot better because it was just a great remaster. So these couple of tracks, we've got to bear that in mind. Disclaimer's over. Let Me Be the One, the B-side to Loving You. Immediately, it sounds like this album in the introduction. More of a laid-back vibe, again, a little bit like If You Choose to Go and Do You Still Dream. But, as this was going through, I mean, I don't think this one's a short one. It doesn't give you the track lengths, but I think these are at least 3 or 4 minutes long. I was thinking as I listened to this probably would have been a little bit better because it's a bit of a laid-back vibe, a little bit of a slower vibe like some of the other tracks that appear on the second half of the album. I do think this one would really suit a more sort of knockout vibe like you see on Deltic, something like Letters from Amsterdam. Really, really would suit that, I think. But I really like the instrumental midsection. Otherwise, it is lacking a little bit. As we've got some building work outside, so we'll just have to try and mute that out. And yeah, it is lacking a little bit, which I think is synonymous with the rest of the tracks, unfortunately, on side 2 a little bit. Don't Look Back, which was the B-side to Every Beat of My Heart, is a totally different story. And I'm just going to read the notes word for word that I made when listening to this. I've only listened to these bonus tracks once, and this was in real time. Rocking intro, nice. Oh yeah, funky. What a contrast to Every Beat of My Heart being a B-side. That's really interesting because this is a rocking track like Guitar Street. And you know what, as I'm listening to this, I'm involuntarily moving my shoulders to this. A really nice riff. And I think that whether this is a remaster, whether because there's different players on here, I don't know. But that full band sound is more definitely on display. The drums are higher in the mix. Is that the 2020 remaster talking? Is that being a different band? I don't know. And the key takeaway from this, if I were the record executive, I'd be binning Do It For Your Love and replacing it with this, because I think Don't Look Back, after One Sweet Tender Touch, just puts, bang, that energy back in the album, which is something that this is really missing. But unfortunately, I'm not the record executive, so I can't do that. But that's a really interesting B-side to look at. Now, don't get me wrong, this song, Don't Look Back, is not up there with Chris Rea's best work. But A, as a B-side, a non-album B-side at that, and B, in the conversation along with these tracks, I think it's one of the strongest. And it has got one of the key things that is missing from some of these songs, and that is energy. So in summary, I couldn't write a short summary for this because there are still a lot of questions going around my mind, and I can't definitively answer them. This is a really interesting chapter, I think, in the career of Chris Rea. Again, career of Chris Rea. Done it again. There is a forward momentum which takes place, I certainly think, because Tennis is my favourite album of this early period. There's a definite momentum from Deltics through to Tennis. I do think that momentum stalls with this album, to a degree. There are some good numbers here. There's a variety of sounds, something that Chris Rea was great at when he was making hit albums later in the decade. But that variety doesn't always hit. And I think especially when there's a lack of that variety going on later in the album, I really struggle with it. Those songs that don't do a lot for me sound a little bit flat later on. There are several key elements that change in this album, remember. The producer, Chris Rea, is joined by John Kelly here. The key players change. None of the players are here from Deltics or Tennis, at least those main players. Does that make a difference? Does the sound change? Does it not sound as good because of that? Time has passed, of course. There's either a year, there's probably at least 12 months between these recordings and Tennis. And you know what? In the early 80s, things changed really quickly, didn't they? And also there's an unreleased album in there, just to add to the pot as well, that One Fine Day. And talking about One Fine Day, if Chris Rea wasn't satisfied with the recordings on One Fine Day, did he then intentionally try and fine-tune some of those numbers? And in maybe fine-tuning, did he take some of the primitive energy that I really loved about the earlier albums out of this? And as I said, I'm not totally sure. And that's why I asked these questions. So I can't give a definitive answer. What's for sure is that this isn't as strong as Tennis, and I'd probably actually put it maybe below Deltics, because even though I really like Loving You, is there anything as strong as Raincoat and a Rose and Letters from Amsterdam in there? I'm not so sure. But what will be even more fascinating is as we move through the catalogue, because we've got Water Sign coming up next, Wired to the Moon after that. Those were 2 albums, once again, I was guilty of only listening to once the first time round. So what I'm really interested to see in this series is whether this is just a blip or a continuation. And that's what we're going to see in the next video with Water Sign. I thoroughly enjoyed looking at this Chris Rea album. It gives me an opportunity to go and look at these albums once again, albums that I only looked at first once or twice the first time round. And Water Sign and Wired to the Moon, there's very little I remember off those as well. So I'm really excited to look at Water Sign. A little bit tentative, because I know that was more, I think it was a album of demos that was rejected by the record company or something like that. So that maybe does ring alarm bells a little bit, but let's see. Let's see if Water Sign is an unexpected surprise. I hope you've enjoyed this one. As I've alluded to in this video, this is part of a continuing Chris Rea series. We're going to look at Water Sign and then Wired to the Moon. That'll hopefully be coming up in the next fortnight. So if you're looking forward to that, do leave a like down below. Comment your thoughts as well. And remember, if you've missed any of the previous Chris Rea reviews, there is a playlist on the channel titled Chris Rea, which features all of my Chris Rea content in there. But if you stayed to this point, I immensely appreciate you joining me. What I'd really appreciate, it only takes a couple of seconds, is just to leave a like down below. If you feel you have something to add, then please do leave a comment down below. That'd be really appreciated. And also, if you can, and you'd like to see regular videos on this channel, do hit the subscribe button. It immensely matters as I try and push towards this 1,000 subscribers number. Anyway, I'm not going to keep you any longer. Thank you very much for your company. Let me know what you think of this album down in the comments, and I'll see you next time for my review of Water Sign. Thank you very much for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye for now.